The flight was packed, the first-class seats gleaming under the cabin lights. Among the passengers was Daniel, a humble gardener who had just been upgraded to VIP, a rare stroke of luck that meant everything to him. But just as he was about to settle in, a flight attendant stopped him. Her sharp gaze scanned his worn-out clothes before she shook her head. "Sir, this seat isn't for you," she said firmly, her voice laced with doubt. The other passengers watched as she directed him toward economy, ignoring his boarding pass. Daniel's heart pounded. He had earned this seat fair and square, but now he was being judged for something beyond his control. The tension in the air was undeniable. Murmurs spread through the cabin, but what happened next? No one, least of all the airline, could have predicted the shocking turn of events that would leave everyone speechless. Daniel stood frozen, gripping his boarding pass tightly. "But this is my seat," he said, his voice calm but firm. The flight attendant barely glanced at the ticket. "Sir, you must have made a mistake," she replied, motioning toward the economy section. Passengers around them exchanged glances, some curious, others uncomfortable. A businessman in a tailored suit shifted in his seat, watching the scene unfold. Daniel swallowed hard. He wasn't one to cause trouble, but something felt unfair. He had worked tirelessly in gardens across the city, saving every penny for this trip. The upgrade had been a surprise, a rare moment of recognition, and now it was slipping away. A murmur of whispers spread through first class. One passenger leaned toward the flight attendant, asking, "What's wrong?" "He has the ticket." She hesitated, glancing between Daniel and the seat. Something about this situation wasn't adding up. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Please check again," he insisted, holding out his boarding pass. The flight attendant hesitated, but finally glanced at it. Her brows furrowed slightly. For a moment, it looked like she realized her mistake, but then she shook her head. "There must be an error in the system," she said quickly. "I'll sort it out, but for now, you'll need to move." Passengers were now fully tuned in. A woman in a navy blue dress whispered to her seatmate. A man across the aisle folded his arms, watching with interest. The businessman who had noticed earlier cleared his throat. "If his ticket says first class, he should stay," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. Daniel appreciated the support, but the flight attendant's expression hardened. Was she trying to cover up something? The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, but the real turbulence was happening right there in the cabin. The tension in the cabin thickened. Daniel stood his ground, his pulse quickening. "I'm not leaving this seat unless there's a real reason," he said, his voice steady but firm. The flight attendant's expression flickered with something. Uncertainty, maybe even guilt, but she quickly masked it. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call security," she warned. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The businessman leaned forward, his curiosity turning into concern. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" he asked. "If his ticket is valid, let him be." The murmurs grew louder. A woman a few rows back pulled out her phone, recording the interaction. The flight attendant's hands clenched at her sides. She glanced toward the cockpit, as if seeking backup. Something was wrong. Was this really about a seat, or was there something bigger happening behind the scenes? Daniel could feel it. He was at the center of something far beyond what he had imagined. Before the flight attendant could say another word, a voice from behind interrupted the growing tension. "Excuse me, but I believe that's my asterisk seat." A tall man in an expensive suit stepped forward, holding a first-class boarding pass. He looked between Daniel and the flight attendant, his expression unreadable. The entire cabin went silent. The flight attendant's face paled. She hesitated, her fingers gripping her tablet tightly. Daniel frowned. What was going on? He had been assigned this seat. He was sure of it. The businessman who had been defending him leaned closer, eyeing the situation with suspicion. "This doesn't add up," he muttered. Passengers shifted uncomfortably as the flight attendant took a breath. There must have been a mix-up, she said, her voice wavering slightly. But Daniel caught something in her eyes. Was it panic? The businessman wasn't convinced either. Or, he said slowly, someone's trying to cover up a much bigger mistake. The air felt heavy with tension as the businessman stood up. Something isn't right, he said, his sharp gaze fixed on the flight attendant. First, you try to remove him. Now suddenly, there's another passenger claiming his seat. The flight attendant's lips parted, but no words came out. Daniel, still gripping his boarding pass, glanced at the suited man. Then, something caught his eye, a small tag on the man's briefcase. It had the airline's logo. His stomach dropped. Before Daniel could speak, another crew member rushed over. "Ma'am," she whispered urgently to the flight attendant. The supervisor just checked. His upgrade was legitimate. The system didn't make a mistake. Murmurs spread as passengers watched the flight attendant's face drain of color. The businessman folded his arms. "So, what's the real reason you wanted him gone?" Just then, the pilot's voice interrupted, but it wasn't a routine announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to address an urgent matter." The cabin fell silent as the pilot continued. "We've been made aware of a situation regarding a seating dispute. After reviewing the records, we confirm that Mr. Daniel rightfully holds this first-class seat." Passengers exchanged glances, while the flight attendant took a shaky step back. The businessman raised an eyebrow. "Care to explain now?" he asked. With nowhere to turn, the flight attendant exhaled sharply. I assumed there was a mistake," she admitted. "I didn't think someone like him." She stopped, realizing her words had only made things worse. Daniel shook his head but said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth had already come out. The other passengers, now fully aware of the unfairness, voiced their disapproval. The supervisor arrived, apologizing to Daniel before escorting the flight attendant away. As Daniel finally took his seat, the businessman gave him a nod. "Enjoy your flight." And for the first time that day, Daniel smiled.